Today I'm breaking down one of my favorite tracks that I wrote for The Way It Was, an original short documentary by Quick Draw Films. The story revolves around Chuck, who was an adventurer extraordinaire in the 70s, and he shot everything on 16mm film. From kayaking and fishing to hunting and just close animal encounters, Chuck captured it all. But despite capturing everything for a movie that he wanted to create, he never finished it. So he teams up with his grandson to try to finish it in 2025. The scene we're looking at today is one where Chuck is remembering and reflecting on his past. It feels melancholy, but a little hopeful. My job was to identify and then work with those emotions and then create a unique soundscape that really elevated this scene. So let's take a quick look. So what I tried to create here is something that coincides with Chuck's feelings, his emotions of reflecting and longing, as well as being happy that those memories had been made in the first place, which is a central theme of the film. So let's get into how I actually made the track. There are only 3 different instruments here. Most of what you're hearing is a guitar. There's also a bass guitar and some slight vocals at the end. Well, one of my favorite things to work with are guitar pedals, effects pedals. And the star of this piece is the Chase Bliss MOOD. Let me show you how it works and how I got some of the main sounds that you hear throughout this track. So looking at the first sound that comes in, it's this really kind of glitchy and ethereal loop. And then we've also got another one that sits on top of it. Much lower and a little grittier. When played together, they work very well. So how I get this sound basically is by going into the Chase Bliss MOOD, playing a chord that's in the key of this song, and then messing with the looping section to create something that sounds a bit like this. So that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to that pedal. And obviously that didn't sound exactly like how it does here, because it takes a lot of trial and error to really pinpoint the sound that you want. So there's really so much that you can do with that pedal in terms of creating this kind of cinematic drone that we hear throughout this piece. In terms of additional processing, when it came to those 2 tracks, one is artificially bumped up a fifth, and one is artificially transposed a whole octave. So that's how we got that really deep tone. Now on top of these two drones, we have these accent hits. So there's nothing too crazy going on there. That's still a guitar, and these little hits serve to accent when there's that cut. So we have the first cut, which is to those shells. And the second to when Chuck is actually picking up the shells. So how I'm getting that first sound is guitar, reverb, delay, and tremolo. All of that sounds like this. For the lower part, it's the same exact processing, just a lower octave. So how I got this part was very similar to how I've gotten those other cinematic drones. It's using that same pedal, but it's using more of its cool features. So on the right side of the pedal is a channel that is a looper, and then on the left is a bit of multi-effects where you've got a reverb, a delay, and kind of a special delay called slip, which we will get into later. So for this part, I ran my guitar through a loop, but then that loop goes through the other channel, applying whatever effect I have it selected on. For example, we can get a sound kind of like this. So basically, while we have that foundation of that loop, that drone, we can still play on top of it. So that's how we get this drone happening, and then when it cuts to his eyes, we have that accent hit. That's all in the same single file. That part continues on a bit, and then we get into the final section. So to start, we just have another loop going on. That's pretty simple, but it has this really nice tonal quality to it. But so it doesn't ever get boring, we have another guitar on top of it. So that sound, that really kind of high-pitched, glitchy sound, is that special delay that I mentioned earlier called the slip mode, and it's used throughout the movie. That loop eventually shifts chords, and as those chords start changing, we have this bass hit. The bass is just one singular whole note on bass guitar with a little bit of reverb and then reversed. So we have this really nice ramping up feeling. We have another guitar that we add in here that's really echoey, adds to the layers and textures, and it eventually creates a melody. We also have vocals come in that's like a very kind of ethereal vocal. Just simple long notes held, a little nasally. The last piece of this puzzle is something that complements the original loop here. We now have an additional loop. And together they flow and they allow space for each other, and it really works out perfectly. So yeah, that's basically how I created this piece. There were a lot of prior versions, but eventually it all fell together and sounds like how you hear it now. The piece is called Chuck Remembers, and it's one of a handful of pieces that I wrote for this movie, The Way It Was. I'll put a link in the description to where you can find and watch the movie, and if you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing, so you can see more track breakdowns and other kind of challenges that I try to do. Thank you so much for watching.